What's going on, guys? It's Justin here, and in a previous episode of our Project Jeep Wrangler Rubicon build, we gave this Jeep a tough yet practical front bumper from the folks over at AEV Off-Road. Now today, we're bringing that party out back, and we're installing a matching rear bumper from AEV as well. A rear bumper is an important upgrade here because it adds some much needed versatility to our Jeep. It means we can install a beefed up rear tire carrier that'll hold a full-size spare. Because again, this Jeep project is all about building a practical daily driven off-roader. And being able to carry a spare to match the 35s we're running on this rig is a huge step towards that goal. The rear tire carrier will also let us secure this genius auxiliary fuel tank from AEV. It's relatively compact with a low profile, but holds an impressive 10 gallons. That's a pretty healthy reserve when you're venturing off-road. So enough talking about the parts, let's get to it. So we went ahead and threw this thing up on jack stands, and we're gonna pull the rear tires off to give us better access to the inner fenders. Next, we're gonna go ahead and remove our stock spare and backup camera. Go ahead and remove the lower inner fender well, and it's just held in by 3 8mm bolts. Go ahead and do that same thing on the other side. After that covers off, remove the outer bumper support bracket. Do the same thing on the other side. While we're over here, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the rear license plate lights. Next, go ahead and remove these 2 bolts here to remove the bumper. Do the same on the other side. If you have a 2021 Wrangler, there's also 2 more additional bolts on the bottom. Now we can remove our bumper. With the bumper removed, now we can go ahead and remove the factory tow hook. Go ahead and remove the bumper bracket on the other side as well. And this back bracket. Now we're gonna remove our tire carrier and our third brake light. With that loose, now we're gonna remove the tire carrier. We're gonna take this apart so we can get the light out. So we already went ahead and removed our backup camera. But to do that, what you're gonna do is take a lady's slipper and slip it under this edge and pry around it and slide it out and then unbolt the camera from the end, and then you'll be able to unplug it. So now we're gonna disassemble the rear bumper to pull the license plate light and marker light harness out. So we're gonna start off our install by putting the end tanks on. And when you go to slide these on, the factory frame has a pretty tall weld here and it makes it pretty hard to get these on. So we knocked down that weld with the Milwaukee right angle die grinder, along with some Summit quick change grinding pads and a Summit quick change arbor. Then we went ahead and painted it with some Summit chassis paint to minimize corrosion. We're gonna go ahead and reuse the factory tow hook hardware to attach this. So with these 4 bolts started, we can move to the other side. Now let's get our other side installed. Now, since this side doesn't have a factory tow hook, we're gonna use the hardware provided by AEV for the bottom bolts. Next, we're gonna go ahead and install these C-bolts around the frame and then a bolt in this hole as well. With the C-clamp snug and this bolt snug too, we're gonna do the same thing on the other side. Due to varying frame thicknesses and squareness, AEV recommends that you check the squareness of the 2 end caps of the bumper. So we went ahead and measured ours, and ours are pretty spot on, but we have a gap on the top of each side. So we're gonna go ahead and insert the shims that AEV provides to take up that gap. So with our shim inserted and our bolts snugged down, now we can go ahead and torque all this stuff. Now we're gonna go ahead and jump to the other side and torque the 2 most outer bolts as well. With those done, now we're gonna torque the 4 bottom bolts. So with our bumper ends on and torqued, now we have to go ahead and drill a bolt hole on each side. So we're gonna go ahead and put a pilot hole in first and then drill it to size. With our holes drilled, now we're gonna go ahead and throw our bolts in them and tighten them down. With those snugged up, now we're gonna go torque them to AEV's recommended spec of 40 foot-pounds. Next, we're gonna go ahead and mount our rear tire carrier bracket. And to do this, we're gonna use the factory mounting holes. Now, to get this to fit properly, we need to go ahead and trim these back vents. So we're gonna kind of hold it up here, eyeball it, mark it with a Sharpie, and then trim it with a razor knife. After we did some trimming, we'll go ahead and test fit our bracket again. And it sits flush against the body, doesn't hit the plastic anymore, so we're good to go. Now let's go ahead and get this thing mounted up. Now go ahead and install this with the factory hardware. Now we're gonna snug these bolts up in a diagonal pattern and then torque them to the manufacturer's recommended spec. With all these bolts snugged up, now it's time to torque the bracket. Now, before we install our tire carrier mount, we're gonna install this grease fitting for servicing. And we're gonna face the grease fitting down away from the long side of the collar. And that's all it takes. Just make sure to face this away from the long side of the collar or else you're not gonna be able to service it. Now we're gonna go ahead and install our rear tire carrier mount. We're We're gonna go ahead and get these snugged up, but we're not gonna torque them yet. And then we're gonna install our bushings for our tire carrier. These are the bushings for our rear tire carrier. AV really thought of it all when designing this. Look at these sweet grooves they cut on the inside to promote grease flow, so when you service it, grease gets everywhere. Now, these do have a slight interference fit, and we're gonna go ahead and knock them in with our rubber hammer. So to get our tire carrier installed, we're gonna go ahead and remove our rear taillight so we don't scratch it. It also is a really close fit to be able to slide this in. So to do that, we're just gonna pop open the tailgate. There's a small access panel on the inside, and then we're gonna remove the one 10mm bolt that holds the taillight in. Now we're gonna go ahead and remove our taillight. Now, since we already have aftermarket taillights installed, we went ahead and added these ballast for the LEDs, so we're gonna pull this out of the way too. Disconnect the taillight, and then we'll set this out of the way for a minute. Before the final installation of the tire carrier, we'll go ahead and grease it. But at this point, we're just test fitting it. So you're gonna wanna go ahead and set your brass washer on top, and then pick your tire carrier up and slide it in. That slid in. Go ahead and take your brass bushing, your retaining plate, and your bolt, and thread it in the bottom. Now that we have our tire carrier in place and we have everything adjusted, we're gonna go ahead and remove it and then torque the spindle mount. With the tire carrier removed, go ahead and torque the spindle mount bolts to 40 foot-pounds. With our spindle mount torqued down, now we're gonna go ahead and install our end tanks. And these just slip into place and use a couple Allen bolts to mount. With all the bolts installed, we're gonna go ahead and torque these to 30 foot-pounds. With that bolted in place and torqued, we're gonna go ahead and knock this plastic plug in. Now let's get the other side installed. To make our lives a little easier down the road, we're gonna go ahead and pre-install this backup light with the AEV auxiliary mount bracket. So we bolted our light to the bracket already, and we're just gonna slide this in place, make sure it fits well, and then we'll bolt it up. It also has this cool cover on the outside that we're gonna trim this hole out and then mount it. So with our light all installed and adjusted to the hole, now we can go ahead and get our bolts installed. We already got this one started. Now with the light all snugged up, we can go ahead and slide our bumper shell on. With the center section of the bumper on, now we're gonna go ahead and start starting bolts. Now with all those snugged up, now we're gonna come back and torque them all to 43 foot-pounds. With our bumper center installed and torqued, now we can go ahead and install our foot pad and our light bezel. And these are just gonna click into place. And then our light bezel. Now we're at the point we're gonna install our tire carrier for the final time. And before we do that, we're gonna grease the inside of these bushings. Put a little grease on my fingers and just lubricate both bushings. Go ahead and install our other brashed bushing and our retainer bolt. With our bolt snugged up on the bottom, now we're going to test our tire carrier to see how easily it opens. It's got about medium resistance, which is what we want. It's not too hard to open, but it won't flop open either. So with that done, we're going to go ahead and grease the spindle. Now, if you listened real closely, you can hear the grease cracking, and that's a sign that it's made it all the way down here and is squeezing in between these two surfaces. So that has enough grease on it. You're gonna wanna come back and service this every couple of months, and if you're using it in rugged terrain where there's a lot of dust and mud and stuff, you're gonna wanna even service it sooner than that. Now we're gonna go ahead and slide our tire carrier mount in. Then after we do that, we're gonna slide the third brake light wiring and the backup camera wiring through. After that's done, go ahead and push this rubber grommet into this hole. This grommet can kind of be hard to get in, so we're going to use a screwdriver to help us install it. Just like that, our rubber grommet's installed. Now we're going to go ahead and reinstall our rear backup camera. And this is very simple. It just slides inside this clamshell provided by AEV and then slides in here. Now it is worth noting that if you have a model that's equipped with a front camera as well, the rear camera is going to be a little bit smaller and move around in this housing. AEV provides an O-ring for the front and a foam shim for the back to tighten it up. So since ours doesn't have a front camera, we don't need to use those. And the installation's as simple as plugging the camera in and sliding it inside the mount. You're going to slide this in and it's just going to click in these two holes back here. That our camera's bottomed out and it's all installed. With our camera installed, now we're gonna go ahead and plug in the harness. And to do that, we're gonna need to pull this rubber grommet out, open up our tailgate, take our inside panel off, and remove this harness. Unplug that. Then we can go ahead and fish the harness out the front. Then we're gonna take our new harness, we're gonna route it through the bracket here and into the tailgate hole. And plug those in. Those plugged in, we're gonna go ahead and reattach the panel. Kind of beat around the panel a little bit, make sure they're all clicked in, and then we can reclose our tailgate. Now we're just going to use a small screwdriver to push this into place. With our grommet installed, now we're ready to move on. So the AEV tire carrier is adjustable, depending on what size spare you're going to have. So we went ahead and followed AEV's instructions, measured ours, and got about 6.5 inches. Following the instructions, they say you should subtract 1/4 inch of that and then use the 5-inch bolt. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to swing our tire carrier open, install this bolt, and see how our tire fits. So with that bolt snugged up, it has these sweet locking tabs, so you can go ahead and bend those over and lock that bolt into place. Now we're going to go ahead and install our anti-vibration bolt. And that'll prevent the tire, that'll snug this up, and it'll prevent this from sliding in when we put the tire on and damaging the tailgate. So now we're going to install our turnbuckle that holds our tire carrier to our tailgate. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and adjust this out initially to 6.5 to 7 inches eye to eye. And then after that, and once we get it installed, we'll go ahead and adjust it to make sure it's a snug fit. And we're going to use washers to space this thing out properly. looks like ours is gonna take about 5 on each side. Once we get that nice and snug, then we're gonna go ahead and adjust the linkage. With the turnbuckle installed, we're gonna wanna adjust this in until it hits the saddle. Touching the saddle, we're just gonna wanna snug it up and take it an additional 1.5 turns. So there's ours is nice and tight. Now with our turnbuckle adjusted, sitting in the saddle properly, we're gonna open the tailgate and make sure it goes through the full range of motion and doesn't have any weird spots where it hits or it's too tight. See, we're just watching to make sure it's not hitting anywhere. That's fully opened. And now we can go ahead and close it. With it sitting in the saddle and everything looks good, we can go ahead and tighten down our turnbuckle. Now go ahead and snug up the lock nuts on your turnbuckle. And you're gonna hold the center portion and just put some pressure on these to lock them down. Now we're gonna go ahead and install our license plate light. We already went and got the harness ran through the hole, and we're just gonna plug it into the light. Now we're gonna go ahead and reinstall our third brake light. Now AEV gives you this slick little plastic cover to bolt your stock light to. And all you do is trim the 2 alignment tabs off the back and then bolt it to the bracket. And to connect it, you just plug the harness in and then slide it over. Just like that, our third brake light's installed. Now the final part of our installation is to reinstall the taillight that we took out earlier. Get that into place, and then we're gonna open up the tailgate and put the bolt on the inside. And our bumper install is complete. While all this stuff looks cool and off-road ready, remember that the ultimate goal here is to build a serious trail vehicle that will have no problems commuting or picking up the kids from baseball practice every day. Being able to see better while backing up in a parking lot or on a trail and carrying a spare if we get a flat on the freeway or in the woods is all part of the plan. We're not done with upgrading our Jeep Wrangler Rubicon though. So be sure to click that subscribe button to the Summit Racing YouTube channel and ring that notification bell so you'll get all the updates whenever we release new videos on this build series. I'm Justin with Summit Racing. Thanks for watching.